like to welcome you to this discussion. We have with us three representatives of the 25 organizations that make up a coalition called Get New York, New Jersey Flood Plan Right, which is an advocacy group looking at a Corps of Engineers study to see how it might be adjusted to really suit our region better than the current proposals. Our moderator tonight is Bonnie Harkin, who is the president of Nautilus International Development Consulting, which is a multidisciplinary firm with public and private clients for planning and implementing sustainable developments in cities with a particular focus on resilient urban waterfronts. She's internationally recognized in sustainable waterfront revitalization projects and has just completed with AECOM the South Battery Park City Resiliency Project, which is in construction. She's also doing resiliency planning for Hunters Point and a climate action plan for Sleepy Hollow, New York. So you can read more about her on the website, but we have a lot to get through. So I'm turning it over to Bonnie now.
Thank you, Gretchen, and good evening, and welcome to everybody who's here in person, as well as everybody who's with us online. I know it's hybrid tonight. And thank you very much to the AIA, of course, and to the Design for Risk and Reconstruction Committee. I'm used to the DFRR also. And especially to Gretchen Banks and Donna Walkavich, the co-chairs of that, for inviting me to moderate this discussion tonight, which is on a very meaningful topic and where we've had recently some excellent good news and may be at a turning point. And I also just wanted to note that we're kind of right in the middle of COP28. So the importance of New York City solving this to help other cities globally is really, really important also. Anyway, I wanted to just let you know the structure of the evening is that I'll introduce the speakers, and then each of them will give a brief presentation to kind of frame our discussion and give you some background information. After that, I will kick off the discussion with some questions from the moderator, and then we'll go to questions both from people here at the center in the audience, as well as from people online. So start thinking of your questions now and during the talks. Then at the end, we're going to save a few minutes at the end to talk about next steps and kind of do a lightning round of the speakers about what they'd like to see next. And Donna Walkavich, I'm sure we'll get through traffic by then and will help us wrap up the program, and we'll have a chance to have a little bit of time afterward for some networking. So let me go ahead and I'm going to invite both Lauren and Tyler to come up and sit down. And where's Kate? Oh. It's on Zoom. Okay. All right. Oh. All right. Okay. Well, our first speaker will be Tyler Taba. Here on the left. Tyler Taba joined Waterfront Alliance in January 2022 as the senior manager for climate policy. He's charged with developing climate change policy and strategy, leading the coordination and convening of Rise to Resilience Coalition, also known as R2R, and identifying changes and trends in climate change that affect and dictate new strategies. Tyler brings 4 years of experience working at the local, state, and federal levels, where he has advanced funding, legislation, planning, and infrastructure projects to protect the Northeast region from flood risks. Prior to joining the Waterfront Alliance, Tyler also had an amazing resume here. He worked for the National Parks Conservation Association, NPCA, FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. He holds a Master of Science in Sustainability Management with a concentration in Sustainable Water Management from Columbia University. So thank you very much, Tyler. And our second speaker will be Lauren Cosgrove. Lauren is with the Northeast, she's the Northeast Campaign Director for the National Parks Conservation Association, NPCA, which is a 104-year-old nonprofit organization that advocates for America's national parks. She works with grassroots organizations, regional coalitions, and decision makers to protect national parks, fight for critical funding, and empower the next generation of advocates. She's an experienced advocate and campaigner working at all levels of government and with frontline communities to bring positive, equitable change to national parks and park-adjacent communities in the Northeast. Lauren's campaign focus on improving access to coastal national parks while addressing current and future climate threats. That's the end of that sentence. Lauren joined the Coney Island Beautification Project as a board member in 2017, and we regret that Pamela Pettyjohn is not feeling well tonight and won't be able to join us from the Coney Island Beautification Project. But in Lauren's role, she does work with community members to respond to the long-term effects of Hurricane Sandy by fostering community engagement, resilience, and education to enhance the local environment. Lauren's also a member of the Citizen Advisory Committee to Rebuild by Design's Living Breakwaters project, which is in Tottenville, Staten Island. She's been a resident of Rockaway, Queens for over a decade and received her MBA from Baruch College in 2021. All right. And finally, joining us online is Kate Boycourt. Kate is director of the New York, New Jersey Climate Resilient Coasts and Watersheds at the Environmental Defense Fund. She works within their Climate Resilient Coasts and Watersheds team to foster partnerships that collectively advocate for comprehensive, evidence-based, and equitable policies, and for investments that bring resilience for all. She was a partner to EDF in her previous role as Director of Resilience for the Waterfront Alliance, where she spearheaded Rise to Resilience, R2R, a multi-year campaign and coalition for resilience, as well as the development of WEDGE, the Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, some of you may be familiar with. Prior to that, she served as Restoration Project Manager for the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program. And she also led a team to develop a climate change adaptation plan for the state of Maryland. So thank you very much to all our speakers. Really exciting to have you here tonight. We're going to go ahead and turn the floor over to Tyler. Tyler, would you like to?
All right. Hi, everybody. I'll just wait for the slideshow to come on. But first, want to thank AIA for having us. Thank you to the DFRR committee. Thanks, everybody, for coming and joining this really important conversation. I'll go ahead and kick things off. We do have a couple of slides to help set the stage and talk a little bit about some of the advocacy work that the three of us have been doing. And I will also say that Lauren, Kate, and I are all members of the Rise to Resilience Coalition. So we all work together in advocacy around the Army Corps of Engineers. And Lauren was actually my boss at NPCA, and Kate had my former position at Waterfront Alliance. And so I look up to both of them a lot. And I feel really grateful to be on a panel with them and to continue working with them. But I know we do have slides, but I can go ahead and proceed without them, but I know at some point we probably will need them to come up. Right. Should I click next? Oh, no. There we go. Amazing. Thank you. Okay, great. So I guess before we start, I'll just ask, can people who have heard or are familiar with the harbor and tributary studies raise their hand? Okay, so we have an audience that's kind of aware of what's going on. But for those who are not, we're going to do a quick little just stage setting about the harbor and tributary study and how it came to be, just to give everybody a level playing field. So This study, let me back up. Hurricane Sandy battered the region in 2012. And after Hurricane Sandy, a lot of things happened. And one of the things that happened was President Obama signing the Hurricane Disaster Relief Appropriations Act in 2013, which did a lot of things for recovery for the city and for New Jersey. But one of the things that it did was authorize the Army Corps of Engineers to commence a North Atlantic Comprehensive Coast Study. And so that study basically had the Corps look at flood risk all the way up the North Atlantic coast. And in 2015, that study was completed and it found a few high priority areas of flood risk. And of those areas was the New York, New Jersey harbor, the New York, New Jersey harbor region. And so the New York, New Jersey harbor and tributaries study, which is the study that we're talking about now that we colloquially refer to as HATS or Ninja HATS, was born out of this broader study. And so the Army Corps of Engineers is the lead on that study at the federal level. And there's a bunch of other key non-federal partners and non-federal sponsors. And so for you all to know, and the people that we'll talk about quite a bit here, besides the Army Corps, there are two key non-federal sponsors on the project that are local. That's the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, with the New York City Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice playing a key non-federal partner role, not sponsor role, but they're still very involved in the project because so much of the project is in New York City, as you'll see in just a second. So the goal of the Harbor and Tributary Study, or HATS, is to manage the role of coastal storm damage in the study area. And you can see here is the study area for the Harbor and Tributary Study. It's about 2,200 square miles. I think 900 miles of that is shoreline, 25 counties in New York and New Jersey, and about 16 million people were captured in the study area. But not all of that is included in the final, nothing is final, but not all of that is going to be included in the what proceeds from the Corps. So where we are closer to today is a super fast forward. But what you see here on the slide on the left side of the screen is Alternative 3B. And this is the tentatively selected plan that the Army Corps has put forward as of August 2022. And so what that essentially means is the Corps has went through and evaluated a series of alternatives for flood risk reduction in the region. And this is the solution that they're putting forward as their plan. And now we have time to respond to that plan, which is what we're here to talk about today. So you can see what the plan consists of is a series of in-water structures or storm surge barriers. So that's the black part of the areas that are highlighted in black. And then a series of shore-based measures, and those are the purple and red that reflect induced flooding features and risk reduction features of the project. And so this spans, as you can see, all over New York City and some parts of New Jersey. The proposal for the Corps right now has a price tag of $52.6 billion. And you may have seen that in the news and in articles, but it's important to keep in mind that $0 of that money exists right now. That has to all be appropriated and authorized by Congress. It has to have the buy-in of both states that we just talked about. And so there's, that 52.6 is just an estimate, and it's probably very likely to change based on what still has to happen. And also importantly, there is a 14-year construction timeline estimated with this project, and that doesn't start until 2030. So we're not even talking about full construction being done until 2044. That's what their estimates are. And again, none of that is really final. That's all a part of this tentatively selected plan here. And so just before I pass it off to Lauren to jump in a little bit about the local perspective, I did want to talk a little bit about and set the stage for some of the things that we've been calling for as a coalition and as advocates in the region. So Gretchen mentioned the Get New York, New Jersey Flood Plan Right. We have an ongoing campaign and website that Kate will also speak to. But on March 31st, we had a public comment period. That was the first major public comment period for the Army Corps. And the Rise to Resilience Coalition submitted comments with 45 organizations signed on in support. And these are the key areas of the comments, these 4 bullets right here. And as you can imagine, a project of this caliber and magnitude is really hard to get consensus on. So it took a lot of consensus building to get to a place of alignment on this. And a lot of people were a part of that. Rebuild by Design played a huge part in that. And so, it's an ongoing thing too. We're still not all totally in agreement, I think, on where barriers should be and where they should not be, but I think we're all in agreement on these key sort of pillars for the most part. So the first being that the project really does not center frontline communities and has not done a good enough job of engaging and empowering frontline communities. Lauren's going to speak to this a bit with some of the experiences in Coney Island, where parts of the city are actually entirely left out of the plan. South Williamsburg is left out, Hunts Point is left out, Sunset Park is left out. So key areas that are experiencing major climate risks are left out of the plan. And the public engagement of the Army Corps has been, has anyone been to one of their public engagement sessions? It speaks for itself, really, I should say. They're not great. And so we've been asking for the Corps to establish a climate and environmental justice working group to have a two-way conversation between communities and themselves and have the non-federal sponsors in the city a part of that, so that there's an ongoing dialogue between the Corps and the community about what's happening. And so that we're not just responding to stuff. So they're not putting out, here's our plan, respond to it. No, it should be more about, well, what has the community already talked about? What existing plans are there? And how can we bring those in to the tentatively selected plan or into whatever the Corps builds. The second piece is to address multiple climate hazards. So I mentioned the major components of the project are the in-water structures, the storm surge barriers, and those are exactly what they sound like. They're storm surge barriers. They address storm surge and really storm surge alone. And as we all know, storm surge is not the only risk that our region faces. There's a lot of growing inland flood risk and rain flooding. There's also sea level rise and tidal flooding and groundwater flooding. And a storm surge barrier doesn't do a lot to address a lot of those risks. And so we've been really pushing for a multi-hazard approach. And I know we'll get into that quite a bit here in a second. And then the third pillar here is to prioritize natural and nature-based features. Right now, with where the Corps is at in the process in the Tier 1 environmental impact statement, there is no data, there is no mention of how natural and nature-based features are going to be used in the project. It's all just kind of punted along to, we'll get to that. That's going to be part of the induced flooding features. That's going to be part of the reduced risk features, but it's not a core part of the actual project. The barriers are the key part of the project, and the green infrastructure are just tie-ins. And we see green infrastructure and nature-based solutions actually as valuable enough to be the main parts of the project in some places, especially places where storm surge is not the primary risk. We're not anti-barrier necessarily everywhere. It's just that barriers don't make sense in places where storm surge is not the greatest flood risk. And then the last bullet here is on a supplemental draft EIS. I think Lauren can speak to this better than I can, but we're essentially calling for new alternatives. We'd like to see some new alternatives presented in a lot of communities and a lot of places in the plan. You're being faced with a barrier or no barrier. And that's it. And we think there should be other options for communities to weigh in on and see. And so that's a little bit of an overview. I think I actually have one more slide. Oh gosh, I have a couple slides. Okay, let me go really quickly. So here are some renderings of what the Corps is proposing. So the in-water structures are the ones here on the left, and you can see that's an example at the top of a Jamaica Bay barrier, and the bottom is a concept for an Arthur Kill storm surge barrier. And again, so those gates would open and close, TBD on how the operations would be handled, but essentially they would open and close when a major storm is coming in. And then on the right side here, you have a photo from, I think this one is from Greenpoint, and this one is from Jersey City. And you can see what the shore-based measures that the Corps is proposing look like. I mean, aren't those that's so creative and lovely, right? Just a gray wall there. So we think that we can do better than this. And we think that the city in a lot of places is already doing better than this. And so how can we maybe channel some of the funding from the Corps to build on some of the great work that the city is doing? I know I came to a panel here a few months ago about the cloudburst management work and Blue Belt, and there's a lot of really great work that we can point to, and this is not that, I think. And so the last thing I'll say just is to give you a timeline of sort of where things are at here. So we've gone through the alternatives milestone. The tentatively selected plan is the photo that I showed earlier with the alternative 3B. So we're past the TSP milestone, and now we're kind of beyond the public comments, and we're coming up against an agency decision milestone, number 3 here. So the agency decision milestone is where those two key non-federal sponsors that I mentioned, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and New Jersey DEP, have to give essentially a thumbs up or a thumbs down of the tentatively selected plan. And so we're not quite sure when that meeting is going to happen. It was supposed to happen this summer. It's been delayed. And now because of a new letter from the state, from New York State, to the Army Corps, we're not quite clear where that agency decision milestone is when that's gonna kick in. But we want to make sure that there's flexibility in the process, and we don't want anything to be locked in at an agency decision milestone. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about that. And then the last couple things to note here is after the agency decision milestone, we move into what's known as a chief's report, and that's sort of the final report from the Army Corps. And then that is what's ultimately sent up to Congress for authorization and appropriation. So Congress will have a huge role in basically agreeing to the project and then allocating funding for the project. And so we've been doing a lot of work to engage our Congress members. Actually, 3 of us are going down to DC next week to meet with the Army Corps at the Pentagon, and then also to meet with some Congress members. And so we'll need them for sure to allocate and help get funding for the project, and then ultimately construction. And what's missing here, which is really important, is operations and maintenance. And New York City is on the hook for a lot of operations and maintenance of the study or of the project once it's built. And with that, I hope that was a good overview. I'll turn it over to Lauren to give us a little bit more color on some of the advocacy and local perspective for Coney Island, and then Kate to also chime in. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyler. That was a lot of technical information. We've all been on this learning journey together. So if it didn't all sync, don't worry. We're with you. We're here. We'll hang around afterwards. We can answer any questions. But it is a very large and complicated study, if there was one thing that you took away from that. And there is going to be many years before anything is constructed. So your advocacy and your voice is critical in all of this. I want to thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Lauren Cosgrove. I am filling in for our founder and president, Ms. Pamela Pettyjohn. She is the founder and president of the Coney Island Beautification Project. Actually pictured here on the screen right behind me. Pamela sends her regards. She was not able to make it this evening. She wasn't feeling well, but thank you for accommodating us. I'm here to share Pamela's words. I spoke with Pamela earlier today, and if there's one thing that she wanted to make sure that I shared with you, it is that people in Coney Island are still very much suffering from Hurricane Sandy. Tyler mentioned, we all know this was 11 years ago, and people are still affected by this today. They are still digging out financially. It has caused a strain mentally and emotionally in the communities that were most affected by Hurricane Sandy. And in the future, it is people who are going to be most affected by this. And we were alarmed and devastated when the Army Corps came out with their original proposal, because it did not include any protections in South Brooklyn, as Tyler was mentioning. Coney Island was completely left out of the plan, even though they suffered the brunt force of those 12-foot storm surge waves. And again, as I mentioned, they are still struggling with the aftermath of Sandy 11 years later. Nothing has changed. There has not been any major investments coming to Coney Island and for South Brooklyn, of that matter. And so we were alarmed to see our community left out of the plan. And the original proposal included 9 regions, 26 communities. And when we weren't on there, we knew that we need to do something about it. So we started to learn, and we found out that the reason why Coney Island was left out is because of a flawed cost-benefit ratio that the Army Corps of Engineers has. So the cost-benefit ratio is a methodology that the Army Corps is required to use by law that basically tells them they can invest financially where they are going to be able to save high valued properties. So high property value is prioritized over people from this methodology at the Army Corps. So we are seeing, as a result, the original proposals of this plan put major protections around wealthy communities in Lower Manhattan, and leaving out those that are most socially vulnerable, like Coney Island and South Brooklyn. And when you dig a little deeper and start to pay attention, you can hear in conversations, in Community Board 1 and Community Board 3 in Manhattan, they are talking about billions of dollars coming into their communities and how they're going to invest those billions in coastal infrastructure projects to protect Lower Manhattan. And Coney Island and large portions of South Brooklyn have not seen those large investments in 11 years following Hurricane Sandy. And so we knew, and Pamela knew, that we need to do something about it. And so the Coney Island Beautification Project started to get involved. We started to learn. We got tapped into the advocacy and the Rise to Resilience Coalition. And we started hosting workshops in our community in 2016. And we knew that our community members needed to hear about this. We participated in comment writing workshops so people could learn about how they can comment and have their voice heard to the Army Corps of Engineers. And we knew that we wanted to build a plan that was led by the community, that the community's voice was at the forefront in the creation of this plan. And we wanted to do this not so that we were protected from the next Hurricane Sandy, but that we were protected from the everyday flooding that we see. Tyler talked a lot about the multiple kinds of flooding that plagues New York City. Coney Island is ground zero for this. Every single time it floods, homes in Coney Island are underwater. The water backs up in the sewer systems and in the street drains. It floods our roads and it makes them impassable. We cannot drive down certain streets when it rains. And in fact, in certain areas on Mermaid Avenue and Neptune Avenue, there are schools that are in some of the lowest lying areas in Coney Island. And when it rains, the schools can be underwater, and there's water up to about our waists. And the teachers and the parents have to come out and actually help shuffle kids getting in and out of school because of how high the water is and that the water could potentially be contaminated. So this is not only an issue for the next Sandy, this is an issue now. It is an issue for the heavy rainfall that we saw over the summer and this past September and October. And the people in Coney Island are continuously left out of the conversation, as we see with them not being included in the plan. So when we started to host these workshops and we told the community how we were left out, they came and they rallied. And I continue to be impressed by the energy that the community of Coney Island brings. And they fought for 2 years to have their community be included in the project. And they were. But when the Corps included them in this draft EIS that Tyler mentioned that was released last winter, we saw that Coney Island was included, and the Corps is proposing to build flood walls and a floodgate across Coney Island Creek. So their inclusion, their proposal, and their solution for Coney Island is to block us in and to not allow the water to go anywhere, to sort of trap us inside with all of this water for nowhere for it to go. And on top of it, the Coney Island Creek, just to the north of us, is heavily polluted from years of industrial contamination. And so not only would this not help us with the everyday flooding, but it would trap us and it would cause a tremendous amount of public health risk. These are the inequities that are in the Corps' plan. And we knew that we needed to do something about it. So again, our neighbors and our president, our founder, and our board members, we rallied. We are thrilled to be working with partners like the Aquarium, the New York Aquarium, Cornell University, and the Rise to Resilience Coalition to be hosting workshops so that the community can develop their own plan and that they can have their ideas be at the forefront of this visioning, because the community members are the experts. They know where it floods the most. They know where the water's going to go, and they know what areas are going to be the most vulnerable, and their voices need to be centered in this. And so that's what our primary charge. And Pamela wanted to make sure that I invited you all to join us. We could use the help and the resources. The community members are coming together to put their plan down on paper, and we would love to work with you. If you're interested in coming out to Coney Island, please do get in touch. We would love to provide you a tour and have you included in this work. And I also wanted to leave on a good note because there's nothing that Pamela comes to without that silver lining and that positive note, and that is, in this vision where we want to learn how we can live with water and redirect the water to places where it's not going to cause so much damage, where we can recover more quickly. We are optimistic because we have an opportunity at our hands. There's a tremendous amount of money that's available to us right now. Earlier this year, President Biden issued an executive order called Justice 40. And what that means is 40% of every dollar that's coming out of Washington, D.C. needs to be going to environmental justice communities like Coney Island. This is an opportunity that Black and Brown communities did not have before today. Not only do we have a tremendous amount of federal dollars, but the state is getting very active. And I know Kate is going to talk about this. The state issued an Environmental Bond Act. There is the mayor's office who's issued a Climate Strong Communities program. There is funding out there, and the members of the Coney Island community are willing to fight. And we are going to get the money to put our community-led plan into action. And we feel really fortunate to be working together at this moment, again, with our partners. We welcome you to join us in that. And I will now leave it to Kate to get us back grounded into the advocacy that we can all do together and where we are and where we hope to go from here.
All right, and so I think I'm probably awkwardly looming over you. I did see a little bit of that remotely, and I saw a few heads I recognize. I'm really sorry I can't be there in person, but I'm sort of watching you from above, and I think I saw Noah and a few others in front there. So just pretend I'm at the cocktail party afterwards, talking to you and catching up. And sorry I can't be there, and thank you so much to AIA for having me, and Tyler and Lauren. I want to first, just before we kind of continue, just pause and say that this is one of the hardest jobs that there is in terms of trying to figure out how to create a future New York and New Jersey that is resilient to flooding. We built, in a way, with abandon on areas that were completely flooded all the time, wetlands. We filled them in and constructed extensively through areas that naturally should be wetlands, streams, and ponds. These are the areas. A colleague, Eric Sanderson, has written a great book called Mannahatta, and has a lot of different projects and is around. If you ever see an opportunity to hear him speak, he's a great speaker, and he really talks about that environmental history in which we sit, and that is why we are where we are. There were also ways that we built and where people live in riskier places that have to do with historic redlining and disinvestment, and that is part of that inequity picture that Lauren spoke about. So I just wanted to highlight that this isn't a tremendously hard job, and we really need flood protection for New York and New Jersey. We need to figure out how we're going to dig out of this mess and what kind of vision we want for our future. And that really has to be grounded, as we're saying, in public engagement and in science. So what we're trying to do is really get to a solid plan that we can all support. I think we're excited about the potential here. And there's just really an opportunity to do that now. And I think we've got a lot of alignment. So I wanted to just highlight a little bit of sort of some of the advocacy that has happened. It's really, I'd say a lot of the work on our side has been a bit of education and coalition building. Tyler leads the Rise to Resilience Coalition, as he mentioned. There's also an organization, Rebuild by Design, that did a tremendous job in partnering with a bunch of organizations to host a teach-in where they brought experts to try to help digest the plan so that folks could understand it and comment on it. I think there were how to comment sessions led by NPCA, and Rise to Resilience led a session of trying to develop comments specific to regions. So we've really dived into this study and weighed in on it in every single reach. And that's really what we need to do. As Tyler mentioned, this is just the beginning of a long process, and I think that's also where you come in, as designers or fan of designers and others that are connected to AIA. I think there is this tremendous opportunity to really engage, and so I just encourage you to do that. The second category of things that we've done is really on working with our agencies. These are the people doing the hard work, from the Army Corps to New Jersey to New York City to New York State, and trying to both sort of get the resources that they have sort of out to the public, but also engage them and push them a little bit to try to get to a better plan that meets a lot of the priorities that Tyler highlighted. And the last piece is sort of on the legislative and advocacy side. We haven't really dove into this yet, but I will in a minute. We've really been working hard with Congress and other elected officials to also shift our federal policies so that the Corps is able to do some of the things that we would like. Um, and also just, we did run a digital ad campaign. We sent letters to every single elected official in New York and New Jersey, from city council to Congress and the mayor and the governors, really sharing these priorities. And that has been heard. We did have a joint letter that came from all of the non-federal sponsors that we worked with this past year to make a lot of aligned requests. But one of the ones that was a little missing was this specific request that is needed to get the Corps of Engineers to include all types of flooding in a study about flooding. This relates back to, I think Tyler mentioned the authorization for this project from Congress, and the way the Corps of Engineers does its work is they really have to listen to Congress and headquarters. And there's a lot of different engineering regulations and books that they essentially have to follow, a pretty standard process for their projects. And that to change that, you have to work with Congress and you have to work with headquarters. So back in 2020, the Rise to Resilience Coalition worked really hard with Congress to change the Water Resources Development Act of 2020. And then subsequently 2022 to enable the Corps to amend this study specifically, but then also all coastal storm risk management studies, to enable them to accommodate tidal flooding, rain-based flooding, like the rains that we saw this year and last year and the year before, and Ida, groundwater, a lot of different types of flooding, pretty much everything there is in these studies. And that's been something that we've been fighting for since day one. In a study about flooding, the solution set that you have is really shaped by which hazards you're looking at. And when you look at tidal flooding over time, that's something that a surge barrier does not deal with. So when we look at areas like Flushing Creek and waterways that are experiencing tidal flooding, they're experiencing heavy rain-based flooding, but not so much surge as frequently, that really factors into the comparative benefits of these things from a scientific level. So that's something that we have been able to change in federal law. But the challenge is right now that we're at this time of change with the Corps of Engineers, where they're actually just developing, they're just coming out with implementation guidance, the guidance for the Corps to do its work on how to do this. And so we're just catching up to how, as Tyler said, New York City, and many of you, if you're designers in the room, would approach this work. There's a great part of the Corps of Engineers, their Engineering Research and Development Center, that does this kind of work. And we really want to get them the resources that they need to do to be doing more of this in more places. I do want to flag that Lauren mentioned Justice 40. There's also been policy directives to the Corps of Engineers to incorporate all of the benefits that they analyze. So those do go beyond property values in their projects, and to look at those. The Office of Management and Budget has finally proposed to update its the way it calculates to have a more equitable analysis of projects from an economic perspective. And then the Biden administration has developed a national resilience framework where they're going to try to have a more sort of forward-looking, coordinated approach on resilience. I mentioned the legislative piece of this, and a little bit about the Corps of Engineers itself. It has great initiatives, including Engineering with Nature, which is a program where they try to look at natural and nature-based approaches to flood risk. We know that we can't do that everywhere, but what we're really looking for in this study is to really maximize those approaches and those that use public space. Overall, I think that we're in an exciting time. We did get, I think this is probably the biggest movement after 5 years of engagement and the study being out there. New York State to send a formal letter, which was the first in the nation, to the Corps of Engineers requesting the Water Resources Development Act of 22 language that we called for to be considered. So they're formally requesting a multi-hazard analysis for the study so that it could include all the types of flooding that we're talking about. We're hoping that gets done, and so we're working with New Jersey, who seems very aligned, and New York City as well, and the Corps to hopefully make that happen. And I think I'll just close sort of my portion of this by saying that, you know, now is figuring out sort of how to do it, and I think that's really where we need to go with this work. And so again, sort of a challenge to all the brains in the room, in the audience, that can kind of help us figure that out. But I will pass it back off to the moderator to take us away.
Oh, thank you very much to Tyler and Lauren and Kate. That was an incredible background. And of course, there's just an amazing amount of information that the three speakers have just given us. I know when I was trying to put this all together in my own mind, there were kind of three categories that stuck out. First is the plan itself. What is the situation with that? Is this, am I getting picked up? Okay. The second is the process. And then third is implementation. How will this actually play out over time as it gets through approvals and construction and so forth? So I really wanted to direct our discussion around those kind of three different types of things. And so let me start with the plan itself. And I know Kate has just talked a great deal about some of the things that people have been advocating for in the plan. We know what we don't like. I'm wondering if people wanted to talk about what they would like to see in the plan. I know clearly we've brought up needs to be multi-hazard, address more than just storm surge. Needs to have multiple layers of protection, both in water, shoreline, upland, all of those. I would add to all that, needs to be multi-purpose. The plan right now is purely adaptation. It has no impact on mitigating the root causes of climate change. So I would add that in myself. And then, of course, the exploration of natural and nature-based features. Those need to be looked at first before we even begin to think about going to engineered structures. So I think all of those things have come through, and I just wanted to go back to the speakers and see if there's some other things they'd like to add to what you talked about originally, of what you would like to see in terms of the plan itself. And then we'll talk about the process and the implementation.
Great question. I definitely don't speak on behalf of the entire study area, but I can share a few of the good project examples that we've discussed as a coalition that we would like to see more of in the plan. And I think you're exactly right, Bonnie. It does start with a layered approach. We need to have first line of defense, but then there are also things that we can do on the outskirts and in the interior to help us deal with all these different kinds of flooding threats, such as sea level rise, major tidal flooding, heavy rainfall, and storm surge. I think you mentioned one of them already, which was natural and nature-based features, the power of nature, where you have the space to have wetlands, soft shorelines, can really help attenuate that wave energy when you've got coastal storms coming through. When you're looking at the interior and sort of the urban environment, I talked a little bit about the groundwater in Coney Island and how when we see heavy rainfall, the water is actually coming up from the street drains. I think that there are some basic infrastructure improvements that we would like to see the Corps work more collaboratively with the state and city on, where they have jurisdiction to input infrastructure such as check valves, where you're dealing with that combined sewage overflow, where you can stop the seawater from coming up, so you reduce some of that flooding that we see in the streets, and then some other. Even going further interior, we would want to also make sure that building zoning codes, land use laws, and buildings are also adapted and prepared to deal with this kind of flooding. And so I can speak again from the perspective in Coney Island, when we've been doing workshops with our partners, we've had guest speakers come in from New York City Housing Authority, NYCHA, to talk to the residents about some of the improvements that have been happening in their residencies, where there are better blockades on the first floor and where there are deployable flood barriers, and making ADA accessibility through and over those flood barriers. So I think that there is definitely a solution within this layered approach, and we should look at both the shoreline, but then also some of the infrastructure interior, and that partnership with the city and the state is going to be instrumental in all of that. Kate, Tyler, please join in here.
Sure.
Go
I can see. So absolutely, I think, and again, we're not engineers and designers, although we know a few. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. I just want to highlight a few opportunities. So there are a couple of existing plans on the books that I think overlap with this area that aren't necessarily integrated as well, I think, into the study. And that's, the Flushing Bay, the area, and South Street Seaport area sort of overlap in these areas, and have existing community or government-led plans that have engaged communities. I think one of the things, in zooming into a place like Flushing, just as an example, one of the proposals for that area, from a community-led plan by Guardians of Flushing Bay and Riverkeeper, was to do sort of a more natural shoreline edge, and think a little bit about limiting new development in that area, which is a little bit controversial. The Flushing Meadows Corona Park is one of the most important parks in New York City. It's also one of the most flooded by rain. It's tremendously vulnerable to tidal flooding over time. And the proposal for that area right now includes a surge barrier, like I mentioned. There's a study, actually, I think being led by Waterfront Alliance, or in partnership with the city, about rain for that project, for that park. And I think there's a really huge opportunity in that area to think a little bit about what would our plan look like if we thought about elevating parts of the park that are vulnerable to rain-based flooding, increasing green infrastructure and the porosity of it, and then really rethinking the way that we're building around this edge that isn't as developed and the parking lots that aren't as used. Then looking over at sort of the Jamaica Bay side, the city's already doing some really interesting stuff with raising street elevations and also raising homes. That's also within the Corps' purview. They have an entire non-structural branch, and that is part of the study. But I think that it probably could be looked at. These are sort of the more living with water solutions, where you have hardening of specific assets, like a wastewater treatment plant or a hospital, and then you are elevating streets, you're thinking about how water can come in and out. That may work for some of those lower density areas if that's what the community wants. Again, that's a big important thing. And then when you have sort of higher density areas in lower Manhattan and northern New Jersey, we're going to have to look at, again, existing examples like the Hoboken Resiliency Park, some of these combinations of not just flood walls, but livable public spaces with some of that sort of integrated into and hidden below some of those public spaces. So I think there's a lot of areas where there are tweaks. And then there's areas where I think that, especially with the surge barriers, we need to think a lot more carefully at solutions that may only protect for one part of the flood risk, and think about, does that make sense in all of these waterways? So I think there's plenty of examples that are already in play to look at here and internationally that we can draw from in many of the areas where there has been a project proposed. And in some where there hasn't. I think we did point out that there are areas left out, one of which was Hunts Point, and that's one of the most important food markets in New York City, providing most of our fruit and veg, I think. So off to Tyler.
Sure, I'll just go really quickly, and so we can move to the next question. But I would agree a lot with what Lauren and Kate said, and I think the biggest what I'm most optimistic about is that we have, I think, let go of the 6 mile long barrier at the mouth of the harbor that would have been from Breezy Point to Sandy Hook, New Jersey, that was initially on the table at some point. Although there's some folks who I think are continuing to push for that. I think for the most part, even the Army Corps themselves recognize that that conversation is dead and that we're not going to build a massive storm surge barrier like that because it would not address the multiple flood hazards that we're talking about. So this layered approach, when we first saw the tentatively selected plan, I think at least my first reaction was, oh my gosh, there's a layered approach. They're looking at shore-based measures and in-water structures. What does that mean? And then you dive into the plan, and I think you kind of get a little bit jaded by it because there's no really mention of green infrastructure, like I said. So, but still, I think this layered approach is the right approach, and it comes back to, it's hard for us, it's hard for me as somebody who works in policy and advocacy to say what I want to see or what should be done without meeting, speaking to the community and empowering the community to talk about what they want and where certain things should go in the plan. And so I think my default has always been to work with our partners on the ground who have that lived experience that Lauren was talking about, and to be making sure that we're carrying through those features and what their concerns are with the existing parts of the plan. And so I think that's what our advocacy has really been about. And the last thing that I'll say that we didn't talk about too much, but Kate just mentioned, is non-structural. And, I think we would like to see some conversation or some funding for this project going towards voluntary buyouts. The city is working on heading up a voluntary buyout program. And they're using some existing funding from Hurricane Ida supplemental, but we need to have a long-standing funding for that kind of program, and the Army Corps has an opportunity potentially to allocate funding and allow that to happen. And in some places where residents are trapped in areas where it floods and infrastructure is not coming, they should have the option to leave those areas. And we don't really have that option right now, at least not strong enough, and not like New Jersey does. But that's one area that we haven't talked about that I think I'd like to see part of the plan, and there's not a whole lot of mention in it in the Tier 1 EIS.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler. You made that transition right away to the process. Yeah, and it's not just having a community-based process, which did not occur at all in the initial phases of this project, but the DEC official letter to the Army Corps of Engineers, which just happened a week or two ago, also asked for things like, regular community meetings, predictable schedule of community participation. So we need the community process to be in a very meaningful way. And that means that there has to be a mechanism for the Corps to incorporate it into their plans. which I don't see as of yet. And they really need to alter their planning process altogether. And of course, all the issues about environmental justice need to be accommodated in the actual planning process itself. The other thing I think is the methodology that the Corps is using. Lauren talked a great deal about the cost-benefit analysis and how that prioritizes property over people, and certainly over the biodiversity that we have in this incredibly rich estuary that we're living in. But another issue on their methodology and their base assumptions is that they used projections for storm surge, which is the only thing that we're really looking at, that did not match the New York City Panel on Climate Change projections, and the New York City Panel on Climate Change is modeled after the International Panel on Climate Change and really does a very, very rigorous scientific review of all of the projections and data coming in the region. So that was they were working with several feet below what New York City Panel on Climate Change calls for. Let's see. Let me just hand it back to Lauren and Kate and Tyler if there's anything else you'd like to add about the actual planning process.
Sure. So the letter that Bonnie's mentioning that came from New York State did request a lot of the Corps. It requested that the Corps actually hire an external consulting firm to lead this public engagement. If you were to talk to the Corps, they would say they did above and beyond what they would normally do in terms of public outreach for this last draft EIS public comment period that ended in March. But they never came to a place like Coney Island. So not every place had a opportunity to actually attend an in-person meeting where there was public transit that was available to them. And so I think that it was excellent that we saw New York State actually step up and incorporate some of the nitty-gritty pieces of process, even getting down to the details of wanting to hire an outside firm to lead this outreach, because we just see the limitations that the Corps has within their abilities to actually do this. And we have also, as an advocacy group, asked the states and the city to step up and help with this outreach. There's a lot of existing structures, whether it be community boards, civic associations, and others, where we could funnel information that is existing forums that people are already used to attending. They receive regular information from these from these avenues, and I think that we've done our best as advocates to also put accountability on the city and states to lead some of that as well. Kate, I'd like to give you a little bit of space here too. I know that you've been focusing a lot on process, on the community engagement piece. So anything you'd like to share here also?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that we win, everybody wins, is if we have a regular engagement meetings with the Corps of Engineers that are public. That's actually happened, I think, in Collier County in Florida. There are other examples where, at different stages, the public has been more regularly engaged and even brought into project design team meetings, which is where the Corps and the non-federals get together. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for that, and especially if they were to convene something we've been asking for, which is an environment and climate justice work group. There's a lot of, we have somewhere between 20 and 30 organizations that were signed on to that campaign. So there's a great start to work with there and really truly help and partner with getting that input and having a process for getting that actually into the plan that's more iterative. I see a question in the chat that's kind of related to this about locally preferred planning processes. I work closely with a colleague who's in Florida, and Miami did propose, the mayor said that they were, we don't want this plan. We've talked a lot about natural nature-based approaches, and that's not in the current one that they had. And so they proposed a locally preferred planning process. usually that requires that if the cost of that, so what happens then is that there's some negotiation between the Corps of Engineers and the non-federal sponsor, and they get the ability to do that or not, and they undergo a years long or more planning process to come up with an alternative. And if that alternative costs more than the Corps' alternative, then the local usually has to pay the difference. At least that's sort of the way that it's often talked about. I think what we will see in Miami will tell us a lot, just like with here in New York, with requesting this multi-hazard study being the first example of that request. I think these are projects that we're learning a lot from, because there actually hasn't been much locally preferred planning processes that have happened as precedents to look at. And there's a lot of other sort of optimized, tentatively selected plan and a revised report. We've been hearing we're going to get a revised report. So I think there's a lot of different ways to do this. And there's a lot of different examples of Congress giving waivers for certain amounts of money and cost shares. So I think what we're really working on is the will to do the sort of get on agreement on what is the right thing to address all these concerns. And really, I think that does come down to all getting in the room together. And that's something that we're hoping in 2024 to really have all the advocacy community that represents a lot of community organizations and larger environmental organizations as well connect again with all these non-federal sponsors and the Corps to figure out how we can get it right.
That's great. We are these answers are really very long. So the third piece I just wanted to mention, maybe I'll mention this briefly, and then we'll go right to your questions and questions coming in online. But the third piece is implementation. And certainly what we need is a really flexible approach to implementation here. It needs to be iterative, as Kate just mentioned. It needs to be phased. And the process needs to be determined ahead of time, because that has a lot to do with how the plan evolves and how the planning process itself evolves. But one thing that is, of course, crucial would be that the environmental baseline assessments get started right away as soon as possible, because they take several years to be scientifically valid. And then that there be environmental monitoring throughout the whole period. This has not been proposed. That we also need, similarly, community baselines and a way to monitor what's happening in the communities as this project goes forward and begins to get built, and what kind of feedback we have from that. On top of which, there may be real new breakthroughs in scientific issues and approaches to climate change. So we need a very flexible implementation process that can take all of these things into account along the way. Yeah, Tyler, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll just say something really quick about that, because that's I think that's really important, and we're dealing with an agency that's not inherently very flexible. I mean, it's the United States Army, and things are very rigid. You know, we're on meetings with them, and they say over after they finish talking, and it's like you know, nature is we need to be flexible and adapt, and the Army is a little bit rigid in the way that they operate. So okay. So I just think we continue to push for flexibility in the plan. And I think the reason that we're working so hard right now is because we fear that we may not have a lot of flexibility. And so we're a little skeptical. I'll speak for myself. I actually won't speak for the other panelists, but I'm a little skeptical that if we do just go ahead and say, well, you know, we can see that this is trending in the right direction, maybe we can fix it later. I'm afraid that we may not be able to fix it, a lot of it later, and some things might get locked in. I mean, we've heard a lot of mixed things. There's a new colonel at the New York district office who's been great, actually, and seems very energized and aware of our concerns and wants to work with us. Colonel Lozado, the former colonel, who I think had just been in this for a long time, he had many times said that the agency decision milestone will lock in the major components of the project, and there's not a ton of wiggle room in the pre-engineering, construction, and design phase. And I think we're learning more, like Kate said, in other parts of the country. There is some flexibility potentially. There just needs to be a will. And so we continue to push for that flexibility. But just so people know that the reason that this is also important in the upfront is that we want to make sure that we get the plan as good or towards good as possible before we let anything really go to Congress for authorization. And again, that's a big reason we've been engaging Congress, is because that's the Army Corps' boss. And so if we can get them really on our side, I think, they tend to listen to Congress members in the state more than they listen to us. Although, as we're seeing, they're listening more and more to us, I think.
Yeah, I really don't envy you going down to Washington next week. That's going to be interesting. Let's see. Let's just turn to questions, and we'll start with people who are here. And just please, if you have a question, say your name and your organization or how you're involved in this this type of work. Anybody want to kick us off? If not, I'll pick up a question that's coming in online. And this. Okay, yes, go ahead. I think there's a mic for you.
My name is Isa. I work with climate adaptation in Denmark, and I'm very new to New York. And certainly over in Scandinavia and Europe as well, the kind of collaborations across municipal boundaries and with the state can be challenging. But the kind of whole institution of the Army Corps as something that administers like the statewide climate adaptation of the USA seems like an absurd thing that I'm only vaguely familiar with. So I'm just interested in, like, has there been, is there a political discussion about changing that kind of administrative structure of like that these processes would be led by city planning councils, by municipalities, in some other organization, a more kind of locally rooted and democratic organization than this statewide army-led institution?
It's actually a federal military structure.
I can take a quick crack at it. So I was going to save this for my ending remarks, and was going to say that although we're being very critical of the Army Corps, they have done a lot of really good work across the nation. Really, they have. And Kate pointed to their Engineering with Nature team that they have, which is really a leader, I think, at least in the U.S. in terms of how to build with nature. A lot of the shipping that is in the harbor is thanks to the Army Corps and their dredging of the harbor. And I think there's a new plan to dredge 55 feet and have even larger container ships coming in. And so they play a really important role. I think there's a conversation probably to be had about the systems that are operating, but the Army Corps can do something that I think that this New York City and New York State cannot do. This massive kind of regional project, I don't know that any other, in the US at least, agency could build or do this kind of work. I think it really is the role of the Army Corps. And so while I think there's a lot of work to get them to get it in the right place, they are probably the best agency to do this in the country. Like, I mean, that goes to questions about funding. Like, New York City would never have this amount of funding to build a project like this. New Jersey would never have the amount of funding to build a project like this. And so the federal support from the Army Corps, or from the federal government, I guess more, is super important. And then being able to work with local designers and city planners and state agencies to get that plan right, I think can work as a model. It's just that yeah, there's something, I know I did say that the Army Corps is very rigid, and, FEMA is also a part of a lot of disaster response. That's under the Homeland Security. There's a lot of militarization in climate work intersecting. I don't know if that's for what by design, but I don't know if others have thoughts on changing that up.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's a really interesting point, and it's really good to look at other examples. And I look at Deltares, which is the Netherlands example of a flood management agency. And I think they do work very connectedly with local governments to do their work. They also consult outside of the Netherlands, and they make money that then they channel back into their research and development department. And actually, way back in the history of the original flood planning in the Netherlands, we like to think that the Dutch are the best, and they're doing a good job. But I think that the U.S. was actually quite involved in the development of that flood plan and its origins, and then they just kind of went on from there. I think the Rand Corporation was originally very involved in that project. Anyway, I think one of the things that you pointed, I agree with Tyler. But I do think that there's this opportunity for a little bit more leadership from federal, state, and local to think about how our management nests using a watershed-based approach and sub-watershed-based approach to flooding, so that we're a lot more coordinated. We have several different agencies, Tyler named two. There's also HUD that are involved in disaster and flood management at the federal level. New York State has about 5 different ones that are engaged in different ways. And New York City just announced a really exciting position. Its first Deputy Commissioner of Flood Resilience in Lorianne Farrell. And we met with her actually this week as a broader group. So I think that there's a lot of room for thinking about how these different pieces coordinate and fit together and make a broader whole. And we're not quite there yet.
Thank you, Kate. Let's see. I'll go to a question that came in online on the chat, and this is from Jim Wright. He's asking, can you speak about options for a locally preferred alternative in specific locations, i.e., how is it defined by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? What is the process to incorporate an LPA into the HAT study? Who does the final design? Who provides the design construction funding? So that's a LPA, local preferred alternative. That kind of fits into exactly what we're talking about. What scope are we looking at what levels, and how is that overseen and administrated? Anybody want to tackle it?
I can attempt. And Kate, I'd invite you to share a little bit more about what you know and your experience down in Miami. I believe it was at the Waterfront Alliance conference earlier this year where there was a panel and the Army Corps of Engineers presented on this project. And then we also had Tyler moderate a panel with a few other mayors from different cities who are facing similar flooding threats from all angles, like we are here in New York. And one gentleman struck me on that panel, and that was the mayor from South Carolina, from Charleston, South Carolina. And they also were the recipient of a Corps proposal where there were storm surge barriers all throughout the city. It was a much smaller plan, it's a much smaller city, but it was similar in scope in terms of what they were proposing. And the mayor of South Carolina there didn't necessarily agree with the initial proposal, and he worked with his city agencies to make an agreement with the Corps to co-design a different plan that didn't only include flood walls around the bottom portion of Charleston and storm surge barriers up north. And so there was a formal agreement with the city and the Army Corps to co-design a new plan. And we, after the panel, kind of pulled him aside and started to ask the nitty-gritty questions to understand what the process of that was like. And it seemed it was a bit of a lengthy process, but now they are actively working together to co-design something. And they're still in the process of designing it, so I couldn't speak to what the results are and what they're going to get instead. But I did walk away with that thinking it was a more collaborative process than what we have here in New York and New Jersey, where we are just responding to what the Corps has proposed. And I know Miami has also rejected some Corps plans. And Kate, if you want to expand on that with regards to a locally preferred alternative, I welcome you to do so.
Sure. Yeah, and I think I kind of talked a little bit about Miami, but one of the things that they are doing, it's basically like the non-federal sponsor says, we want to do this. And then they work with the Corps to figure out and whether or not and how they can do that additional planning. And so the Corps, when they do their studies, they always have, I think it's 5 alternatives or different versions, different plans, but that they're sort of investigating and determining which one is the best from their lens. And one of them is always no action, doing nothing. So they always compare it to doing nothing. And then there are different variations and sizes of protection. And this is essentially adding a new one where the local sponsor is taking a little bit more active role. What we're seeing in Miami is that the non-federal sponsor there, Miami is joining hand in hand the Corps of Engineers and really sharing the engagement process. And there's been a more iterative engagement process, meaning multiple meetings and shifts in the plan as it goes along. And then, like I said before, the result of that is the Corps of Engineers, at least historically, has said, if it costs more than the preferred plan that the Corps put forth, the difference in that cost would be borne by the non-federal. So I think we've seen actually a little bit of a shift in how Miami is referring to this process, and it seems like there might be an agreement that the end proposal is not necessarily going to be more for the non-federal sponsor, and that's one of those areas where I think we're seeing a lot of different ways to get at more engagement. By a different name. So just, you've got optimized TSP and locally preferred plan. And then there's a few others that I think are ways to get at revisions to a plan that we can hope to see.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add really on the locally preferred plan. I think Kate and Lauren summarized it really well. But one thing that is also important that I think hasn't come up is and it's related to all this, is the cost associated with a betterment. And that's another thing that can happen in a project. And I think, Kate, we saw that's happening in the South Staten Island, right? Where the city is now paying, or is that right? Where it's like $90 million more on a.
This is I heard this from the state, and the reason when they called and talked a little bit about some of their reasoning for joining us in requesting that rain-based flooding and all these other types of flooding are incorporated, is exactly that, Tyler, that and this is not written down anywhere, so I'm trying to get to the exact root of that number, but I heard $90 million for a betterment, meaning additional money to fix some of the rain-based flooding after building the larger sort of South Shore dune and seawall area. So that has ostensibly caused more rain-based flooding that now is a big bill that the city is saddled with.
Yeah, and I bring that up because, again, going back to the point earlier about getting it right now, is that if things change later on, then this New York State or New Jersey or the non-federal sponsors together could be looking at a betterment where if you want to make changes to the plan or make it better, you're on the hook for that addition, like the local sponsors on the hook for that additional funding. And so I don't know if the $90 million is accurate either, but I think that if you do build a project addressing just storm surge and then you decide to change it to also address rain-based flooding, and you don't do that early enough, the local sponsor might be on the hook for a lot of that funding afterwards if you do want to make the change.
And there's no greater cost than something that fails and that loses, property life and all of that. So I think that's also something we don't take lightly with all of these changes. We also need to do this quickly. And that's just the challenge here, is what can we do now to make sure we get it right? And we also get a plan because we need protection, but we also, having more of those risks considered means that we don't end up also just risking personal, life and property.
I'm going to ask if there are any questions from the audience. Yes, go ahead, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Lauren Wang, formerly in city government, but really just here on my own out of curiosity. What I'm hearing is really exciting because what I'm hearing is that there's a literacy being built. There's a literacy being built from more than a decade of Hurricane Sandy recovery, from the communities, from the ground up, literacy being built between local and state governments, learning to collaborate well, and then also literacy between local, state, and the federal government, the Army Corps, to be able to collaborate on a project as big and as long-term as this. But I'm going to take this in another direction, which is something that I'm wondering. If you know me, you know I'm often thinking very long term. And so what comes to mind for me is the Thames Barrier, which was built about 20 years, or it opened 30 years after catastrophic floods in London. So it flooded in 1953. And a generation later, the Thames Barrier was opened. And so for the past decade and a half, I think, the authority that manages this has been planning for Thames 2100. And the Thames Barrier is now being opened and closed much more frequently than it was designed for, which is stressing its capacity to serve. And the authority that manages it is also looking at potential relocation sites and the opportunities to kind of like shore this up for the next generation of flooding. Now here we're building our first generation of like, citywide, regional, major infrastructure. And I'm curious what the conversation is if you thought ahead to, when this opens in 2044. What happens in 2080 and 2100, and how can this literacy that we're building now equip us to deal with that future?
Excellent point. You're reading right between the lines. That was a big point that we all made in our comments, individually, organizationally, as a coalition. And I think even, in fact, the Army Corps acknowledged as sea level change accelerates and we see more impacts of climate change, we may need to be opening and closing these flood barriers and the storm surge barriers more frequently. And they agreed to do more than one environmental impact assessment. So we just have one so far. And if we were to continue to just move forward with the plan that we currently have, so not looking at multiple flooding threats, the everyday flooding, not looking at layers of defense, but just the storm surge barriers that they've proposed, they promised to get to that level of detail in the second environmental analysis, which at that stage in the timeline that Tyler had showed us was after a critical point, which was after the agency decision milestone and the chief's report that he had mentioned. And those are technical terms, but that is the moment where you lock in the largest components and the most expensive features of the project, which would be those barriers. So that's where the nervousness comes from, that we are concerned about. If we wait until the tier 2 analysis, where we find out how much more frequently will these things be closed and what will the environmental and the hardscape impacts be from those closures, we'll have already passed the checkpoint to having the Corps continue to spend millions of dollars just on a study that is shortcoming of the threats that we see today. As you can imagine, if you close these gates more frequently over time, that could potentially lead to impacts of sediment movement in these water bodies, tributaries. It could impact the nitrogen loading and the pollution and the contaminants behind the gates. And then the question also arises, how long will these gates be closed for? And the longer they're closed for, the more standstill water that you have that brings other challenges. So the Corps hasn't analyzed it yet, and we're trying to fix the study and get the problem statement right before we get past those initial checkpoints.
Yeah, we are running low on time. So let me say there's been some very nice things coming in on the Q&A from our online audience. Thanking everybody for their advocacy and for your talk tonight. I think we'll just take one more question from the in-house audience, and then we'll go to the next steps.
Thanks, and hi y'all. Hi Kate. It's Julian. I work for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And since this is being recorded, I should probably have a disclaimer that this question is my own, does not reflect the queries of the Federal Reserve System or the New York Fed. They beat that into us. But I'm wondering, thinking about kind of going back to the political will question, wondering what you guys are thinking in terms of what's needed to get us to kind of the place we need to be and where the study should be. Is it a broader coalition? Is it a deeper coalition? Is it more local groups from different parts of the communities affected writing letters? Is it a different political majority in Congress? Yeah, curious about what the wish list looks like as things ramp up in the next couple of years.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody want to take that one on?
I know. Well, I want to make sure, because Kate's on Zoom, so I want to make sure she has a chance to also go. You got it. I'll go. Okay. Well, yes, to all of those things that, like we'll make a pitch at the end about getting involved. And, I forgot to mention that AIA also signed on to the comment letter, and there's a role for advocacy for sure for architects and planners and engineers and designers to play in all of this that brings a different level of expertise that some of us don't have. And so, yes, absolutely. There's something to say about Lauren's point about literacy also in the communities and making, there's definitely, this is a long ongoing process. And so it's not going to end with us, it's building literacy and awareness with young people and with everybody who's going to be part of these communities in the future. The political question is really important because another thing that didn't come up in the beginning whenever I was talking, because it's so complicated and this has been going on for such a long time, is that the funding for this project was altogether pulled during the Trump administration. And so there was no work being done. It was all halted. And then it wasn't until 2021 or 2020 or 2021 that the funding was reauthorized back to the study to keep going. And that's when we got the tentatively selected plan in August of last year. And so politics plays a big role in it, for sure. And there's, conversations about potentially, people say privatizing the core. I don't know if that, I don't think there's a lot of will behind some of these things, but politics plays a big role in it. And what I think is really important politically on that timeline from earlier is that when it comes to authorization and appropriation is that we're going to need Congress and the Senate to vote in favor and in support of allocating however many billions of dollars. Look, this isn't gonna, there's no way, let's say it sticks with 52 billion. I doubt that comes in one go around where they allocate 52 billion. It's probably gonna come in multiple years of funding, but you need strong champions in Congress to be able to take that project and go to bat for it, especially here. And I think what we've been trying to do is show our members of Congress that, I should maybe back up and say that if we have a plan worth fighting for, then we can push our members of Congress to go to bat for that plan. If the plan remains sort of as is, where community is not engaged, people don't feel bought in on the plan, it's harder to sell that plan, I think. Although, this is the New York, New Jersey harbor region is one of the most densely populated regions. It is probably the most densely populated region in the country and a lot of critical infrastructure here. So it's not going to go underwater. I think that will do work and they will put money to it. It's just about getting it right. So politics plays a huge role in it. Whether whether or not we get funding for it, I think is to be determined. I think I'm optimistic, but I don't know if that answers your question at all, but I'll let Kate and Lauren also chime in because it's a really important one.
If you want to say something briefly, but we're running close to the end, so I do want to leave time for everybody to have a chance to say next steps. But go ahead and respond.
If advocacy is not your thing, I get it. Let's talk later because there's opportunities through social media and other forms of journalism that can also get the point across. There's a great program called mycoast.com. You can take photos if your community is flooded and post them. That gets all logged and used for others for advocacy purposes. There's also a great program called Flood Watch if you'd like to see tidal gauges installed in your community to actually get scientific data about where and how much water is coming in. So there are options if advocacy and Congress isn't your cup of tea.
I know we could keep going all night probably, and maybe tomorrow as well. But I did want to leave time for just everybody to say a little bit briefly about what they see as the most important next steps for us to take. And then we will have some time after that for some continued networking. But yes, so go ahead. Kate first? Okay.
Sure. Hi, Lauren. Hi, Julian. Sorry, I can't see you. And probably many other people. I think that, you know, one thing just to say overall is that I do think that we are at an exciting time where the more that we've made a bit of awareness about this, we've seen higher and higher levels of folks in the agencies and the states getting engaged and at the core. So I think that the more that we talk to each other and our elected officials about this project and about what we want to see, going to meetings when they happen about flood risk management projects, whether they be the Corps or others, it will be part of that education that Lauren mentioned, and that's really critical. But right now, I'm really excited about our trip to DC next week to talk to the Assistant Secretary of the Army and Congress. I think we actually need to get the scientists and engineers and advocates all in a room to really understand each other and hash it out, and so that we can be all on the same page and pushing for the same things. And that's something that we're trying to work on within our own sort of coalition and with scientists and talking to our partners.
On behalf of our founder and president of the Coney Island Beautification Project, Miss Pamela Pettyjohn, if she had one wish, it would be that Coney Island becomes the prototype for all of New York and New Jersey, to be the place that we experiment with some of these great and innovative ideas and put into practice living with water strategies. She's shared with me, Coney Island is the perfect size and geographic location right on the water's edge to test some of these things out. And so we again invite you all to join us. Please connect with me afterwards or on the chat. I'm sure it will be saved. If you are interested in coming to Coney Island, we would love to give you a tour and potentially use this as a prototype. That would be our wish. Thank you.
Tyler.
Okay, hard to follow Pamela via Lauren, but I will try. I would say, you know, I'm most excited that we're finally, I feel like, making some big wins and some big progress now. People are listening. We've consistently had members of Congress sign on to letters with us. We're now getting the states to sign on to letters with us. I think, you know, it would be great if you're interested in this project and want to be involved in this project to please connect with us and join the coalition and be involved. There's so many, like Lauren said, there's so many different ways to be involved, and your expertise is really important. So I feel optimistic that we're moving the needle in the right direction. And there's also something to be said about all the federal funding that exists right now and all the projects that can advance with or without the Army Corps. You know, the time horizons are so long, and we can still be thinking about how to build resilience and into our systems while we continue to push the Corps. So I'm excited to think about how that all fits into this picture. So yeah, with that, thank you all very much, and I'll pass it, I think, off to Don.
Yeah, let me pass it over to Donna.
Yeah, let's really thank Kate, Tyler, and Lauren for not only a great presentation, but all the hard work they've done for the last 5 years to get to this point with the Army Corps plan. So thank you, and thank you for being here tonight.